I can. I think that this is probably the most important thing that I've seen happen on the campus in a long time, just in terms of this issue, because up until now there's been a lot of this way, but very little. And like that's what I say, if people can't talk in Ithaca on the South Hill, then there's a fat chance they're going to talk in Gaza City. So.
Okay. Hussam, if you could start, can you talk about when you go in, how your interactions, what were your interactions with Israelis?
Sure. So, so just to give people a time reference, so I grew up late 80s and through the 90s. So basically I saw the, winding down of the first Intifada, the first Gulf War, and then the Oslo peace process, basically when it started, and then how it sort of dwindled down, and then like the beginnings of the second Intifada, and then I came to the United States. Honestly, our interactions, we're not, as Palestinians living in the West Bank, you would not deal with Israelis on a day-to-day. So it's not like your neighbor is Israeli. We're living in Palestinian towns and cities, and you get essentially interactions through Israeli soldiers who, are on patrol missions or like man the checkpoints or do this and that. Or on the other hand, like when you're traveling between cities, so I grew up in a town, so we didn't have like any farming resources or anything like that where we'd actually interact with settlers, as normally is the case. But like when we travel, sometimes we'd see like the occasional, often we'd see the occasional settlers, but that's it. So that was the prism through which I saw.
Yeah, and you were telling us when we first talked that generally the view of the Palestinians was don't talk to the settlers. Right?
We're generally afraid of settlers more than we're afraid of soldiers, because ultimately soldiers are sort of bound by the rule of the army and everything. However we feel it's lax and everything, but ultimately, theoretically they're more disciplined. Whereas settlers, from our view, they're like the more fanatic ones. These are the ones who are, out there building outposts and, like little shacks out in the hill so that they can expand it into a settlement. So these are the guys who are really sort of like gung-ho about like sort of the expansion of the state of Israel, and they don't take kindly to us, I think. And so we were more afraid of settlers than soldiers.
And Avi, just during your time in Israel, what was your interaction with Palestinians?
So I had I would say a markedly different experience, both as a citizen and as a soldier. I actually spent some time living in the West Bank. When I got there, I was much younger. I was like 17. And I lived on this little settlement on the other side of Jerusalem, so the West Bank is kind of north to south. And probably more than half of it's on the northern side of Jerusalem, and then there's another part of it that goes from Jerusalem to Hebron down to Beersheba and that kind of stuff. So I was on the other side, in between Jerusalem and Hebron. And so that's primarily kind of like agriculture-based little communities. And my interaction there was, I was talking on the phone today, I think people, so you grew up in Ramallah, right? So it's more of the city. There's a gas station on the at this big junction right in the West Bank, and every time I sit there, I think it's probably the coolest place to make like a reality television show or something, because it's just this. You read about this, the West Bank and Israel and the conflict, and there's just one place where there's like this meeting ground, and it's in the West Bank, I guess, because many Palestinians, don't have easy access into Israel. But it's like the meetings that go on. There's like businessmen meeting other businessmen, because there is trade and there is that, and it's just a trip to watch. But I think the point you're saying, that the issue of us being more scared or kind of hesitant to approach settlers versus soldiers, I think that's a big part of it. I mean, a lot of the settler movement, I think, is kind of biblical in nature, and that's where I think a lot of, well, I don't know if I should say this, but a lot of the world's ills maybe stem from kind of religious fanaticism, and so I think that's kind of the element that you were touching on. But I don't know, I'm hesitant to say that there's none. The surprising thing is, I think, some of what I've seen is, it's the people, the Israelis living in the West Bank that have more of a relationship with the Palestinians than the kind of really progressive Israelis living inside Israel, because they just don't have the opportunity to interact as much as they do. Now, there are relationships that have gone on for years. I was telling you, there's a store I used to shop at, a hardware store, and it's jointly owned by Israelis and Palestinians. One day the manager there is, Moshe, and the next day it's Mohammed or something, and it's literally like that. But I don't know if that's the case across the entire West Bank. That's kind of the interactions I had. The flip side of that is, as a soldier in the West Bank, like you said, it's more of a limited interaction. You're there kind of to fulfill a role, not so much to socialize, I guess, or even to work with. But having said that, there's still many instances where you work together. I mean, there's the IDF and the Palestinian Authority work together on certain instances and cases and operations. So there is interaction, but clearly not. It's limited in a sense.
Hussam, could you kind of comment on whether the example he said of the store jointly owned by a Palestinian and an Israeli, is that the exception, or is that very rare, or is that?
As in, like, you see, like, small businesses being owned inside the West Bank?
Yeah, inside the West Bank.
Almost never.
Yeah.
Because, well, I mean, there are many reasons. Well, one of them is stigma, obviously. I don't think any side would like to sort of like go into a joint venture, either way. But the reality still remains that Israel is the biggest sort of, like all our imports go through Israel and whatnot. So there is collaboration, but the collaboration goes sort of business to business rather than individuals joining together to form a business. So.
Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting that this is the norm, but I'm saying this idea that there's like absolute separation.
Yeah, well, it's good just to specify if it happens, how often it happens.
Oh, yeah,
and when you were in the military, what was your interaction with Palestinians then, personally?
What was my interaction with
Yeah,
Palestinians?
were you stationed in the West Bank?
For part of my service.
Okay, what were your interactions with Palestinians during that time?
I'm sure Hussam can tell you. You know how it
You were the
goes.
soldier, huh?
The interaction. And what, in actual, like, how do they go?
Yeah, personal, and like.
Well, for the most part, you don't have a lot to do. If there's no reason to interact with them, there's no reason you would be there.
Okay.
In the event that there's a checkpoint set up, then the checkpoints will tell you exactly how it goes. I mean, where you're going, why, or usually there's a specific reason, believe it or not. They're not just like, let's mess with people instead of a checkpoint. Usually you're specifically looking for something, there was a threat of something, and then that's kind of how it goes.
Yeah. Are there particular things that you would look for, like, what would be the specific thing you were looking for at a checkpoint? Like, if there was a threat, like, what would they tell you to look for?
37 Kalashnikovs in a trunk.
Okay.
It's not like something.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, I don't know, soldiers in the West Bank, I think, is a tough one, and like you were saying, there's a certain discipline, because I don't know if everybody thinks they necessarily should be there as a soldier to take orders, but, yeah. But the rules are strict, and I think, like you said, I think there's a lot of, I think, they don't mess around. There's very strict, you spend an entire week talking about what you can and cannot do in cultural sensitivity, and not even, the things you aren't supposed to do, and if you do them, you're in deep trouble. It's not just like this ragtag group of soldiers, although I think oftentimes it's kind of painted like that. There are rules, and if you don't follow them, you get in a lot of trouble. So most people generally do. And I think you'd be surprised if you interviewed more soldiers that most of them aren't actually out there to hurt people. They're just doing this because this is kind of what you do in the country, and it's for protecting or whatever it is.
So I'm going to deviate from that. So how are perceptions of the other side perpetuated via the media, schools, institutionalized and outside the classroom, and the government itself? We'll start with this.
So around the time that I was growing up, we we really didn't have that many institutions, sort of top-down Palestinian. Because, you know, in the late 80s, we're still under Israeli occupation, sort of that is managing the civil parts of society, as in issuing IDs, driver's license, you know, and controlling curriculums in school and whatnot. In the 90s, then the Palestinian Authority came. It still was not sort of as fully set up as it is now. And to be honest with you, like, the Palestinian Authority never really was that sort of, you know, powerful enough to sort of like just stand on its own besides, you know, and control sort of everything. So, honestly, like, at the time that I was growing up, there wasn't sort of much to do, like, sort of about Israelis in the media. Like, the media that we received was, before the proliferation of satellite dishes, we had basically a couple of Israeli channels, a couple of Jordanian channels, and a couple of Syrian channels, and that's it. And then, so you really did not need something sort of like from the media or some, you know, some sort of top-down propaganda or narrative to be told on you. Your view of the other side really materialized from, you know, from your daily interactions. You know, like in the prep interview, I told you guys, and I'll share with the audience, obviously, you know, my kindergarten teacher got, you know, got killed in a demonstration in Ramallah. So it did not make me sort of like, I did not need the media to tell me to be afraid of Israelis or Israeli soldiers, because like I got to experience it. Like, my teacher was there, and the second day she was dead. And then like, you know, one day I was going home with my brother from class, and like, you know, people were running out of the center of town because there was a demonstration and Israelis were firing back at us, at the Palestinians. But like, you know, we lived sort of towards the demonstration, and like I remember like I had to carry it, like, you know, run with my little brother opposite of where everybody else is running away from. And so these things sort of like, you know, shaped it. Like, my dad got shot in the back with a rubber bullet like during one of the demonstrations. That was, you know, early 90s. And so, you know, these things sort of happen. And so it's not sort of like the view was not really was not really, as I said, top down. It was sort of organic. You just come into this world, and that's what you see, and that's how you become. That's how you learn to sort of be afraid, and that's how you come to sort of, you know, obviously, you know, it's not like always kind feelings that you feel towards the others, because it's not pleasant to experience these things.
Now, can you talk about your participation in the like coexistence programs like Seeds of Peace, and
yeah, sure.
and how you also participated in the collaborations between Israel and Palestine?
Yeah, sure. So so in the middle of the 90s, the Oslo Accord was there, and there was like some efforts to, quote, normalize relationships between Palestinians and Israelis, and they tried that on sort of multiple levels. And so I somehow by luck was participated in two of these efforts. So the first one in 1999, they decided to create a joint curriculum for just one subject. So everything else you'd learn normal as you'd learn, and then they'd have this extra class you'd take, which is just basically telling you about the history of the conflict and the history of the other side. And they gave that to a few pilot schools, and my school was one of them. And so we learned about sort of the history of the conflict, not just from our point of view, but from the others. And then at the end of that school year, our school and the Israeli school that was doing that